to introduce a man who I've known for many years. We're sitting down.
Oh, yeah, true. Yeah, no, it's way better.
He's extremely high energy.
Yeah. It's much better. I need to...
Former TV scientist.
Yeah, did some stints back in the younger days.
Oh, yeah. Maybe you can tell us about that to kick off.
Yeah, for sure.
Please put your hands together for the first official speaker of the Crabshack, Daniel Keough.
Thank you.
Dr. Daniel Keough?
Professor Funk is the one. So, my career is in science communications because I was too dumb to actually do science, but it was the career of talking about the fun stuff about science. So my original passion came about in university when I discovered that species of Australian marsupials fuck themselves to death. So it was just this moment that you were just like, it is so bizarre, the stuff that is out there, and you think that you're pretty interesting, but there's always far more interesting stuff out there. So I was really fascinated, and I wanted to tell people about these marsupials that have orgies at the end of their life, because it was too weird to kind of pass. So do you know what I'm talking about today? Have you been told the big broad question? We're going to be talking about aliens, but the really cool thing about, you know, when scientists talk about aliens, it's not crazy. You know, it's not like, you know, American kind of out in the truck yard type of thing. It's a really thoughtful way of thinking about aliens, and it leads us to contemplate what the heck is the whole meaning of life. Like, why are we here, and are we alone in that? And it starts off with a bit of maths. So the thing that we'll be talking about, and this will really test my upside down writing skills, but is this thing called the Drake equation. So has anyone heard of that before?
Just Drake.
Yeah. So if you do it as a graph, it's like that. So if you start at the bottom, now we're here, and now the whole team fucking here. That's the Drake equation. So the Drake equation, I will use. Oh, that's a good way of erasing things. So the Drake equation is basically a way of estimating whether we're special or not. So this whole thing of the fact that we have, you know, this society, this human race, this intelligence where we're able to gather around in a garage, probably illegal bar, and talk about aliens. Are we alone in that? So there's a way of estimating that. So if we're talking about smart other species, how many of them there are out there, we can kind of calculate that by this Drake equation. And what it asks us about is, okay, how many suns are there out there? And then with those suns, how many are sort of systems like our own, so that they have planets? Because it's no good having a sun and nothing on there to actually occupy. So they're times how many of these things are getting made, how many of them are planets that we could possibly live on, and then on those planets, how many have life on them? Whoop, let's add some flagella on that. How many of those things are flagella? You're already learning. Then how many of those with life go on to be, you know, smart thinking things, intelligent, but then at a point where they become intelligent, when do they start communicating? So obviously they're not letting themselves hide, they're communicating out to the world. Then the final thing, so they're all like fractions of each other, is the probability of how small these things are. And then there's a period of time, right, of how long does this part last. So you've got these things that get smaller and smaller and smaller. But the thing with when you start talking about space and the universe, and kind of the small thing of our galaxy, is that the numbers are so large, right? So the galaxy has been around for 3.5 billion years or so. And we estimate that this number here is something like 400 billion. So you've got 400 billion of these whoop, stars. Not all of them can be the type that could support us, but just to give you an idea of the fact that these things are so large that even if things are very, very rare, that would still give you such high numbers, right? So if we're thinking about winning a lottery, so something being as rare as winning the American lottery, you would still, if you had 400 billion of these things, you would still have 100,000 people winning the lottery, right? So you still get lots and lots of opportunities. Given that we know that, given that we know that the time that we've had is really, really long, we can get to this point and we're starting to learn a lot more about how many of these stars that we're finding have planets. So, and these things have all happened like in our lifetime. So I don't know if you remember, but when did they first sequence the genome? Do you remember when that was happening? When it was like a race to sequence the genome?
1990.
That's actually pretty close. It was around that era. So it was this whole like human race of like, there were different strategies. Now we can do them in a matter of minutes. You can basically put a new species in and go, yep, we sequence their whole genome. So what was happening around that time? In the 90s, we discovered the first extraplanet, right? So we theorised that they would be out there because we know our solar system, so all the ones and all the way up to Jupiter, plus Pluto and whatever. But we only found one in like our 90s. But now we've found hundreds of thousands. And in fact, so we've been able to look with telescopes in a short area and point it at them for a significant amount of time. And we actually think that every single star has an average of 1.4 planets to them. So planets are not actually that rare. So there are billions of planets out there. So your opportunities to have species like ours and life is massive. And the amount of time that they've had too. So the other thing that's happening at the same time is looking at which of those planets could be suitable for life. So what do you think is, part of that? What do we need to have a planet that's going to be perfect? Just the right fit. That's it. So water, we think, because we've got a sample of one, is pretty vital to us. And there's this thing called the Goldilocks zone. So when you have a star, you've got some space around it. So if you've got a planet here, it's too close to the sun and it boils. Like you can't have life, water can't sustain. But if you're all the way out here where Pluto is, it's too cold. So you have the Goldilocks zone, which is just right. It's beautiful. You can have water, you can have beautiful. If you've got a climate, you can have clouds and an atmosphere, and you can maintain life really nicely. At least we've found that. And we've got some planets in our own solar system that are in that bound. So Mars is on the inside that area. Venus is just outside of it. So what you're looking for is, depending on the size of the star, how many could sustain life as we know it. So that in itself is a question. But in that, we've already looked at that slice and we've identified that probably 200,000... Ooh, which direction does 2 go? That?
I think this guy's the smartest thing.
So out of that number, there are actually a large portion that have the potential to host water, host life that we think. So then we start getting into parts where we can't look at with telescopes. So you can't see something microscopic with a telescope because these things are, hundreds of light years away. So this is where we start to think about our own world and our own history, and we're finding out new stuff about that. But if we go along this line and depend on how rare it is, Drake himself, who, he's released a few albums, but you might have heard of him, thinks this is in that range. So tens of thousands, there should be tens of thousands of forms of life out there that are communicating, because these numbers are so big, and we're actually late in the game in terms of where we've come. In terms of the development of Earth, depending on the galaxy. So actually, there's been a lot of time leading up to this. So one question is, if we've got this number, it's really probable. So it's highly likely that there is life out there, if you think about these things, that this shouldn't be rare. What we're doing here right now shouldn't be a rare occurrence. So the question is, where the fuck are the aliens? And that is my talk. No, where...
Can we quickly get some drinks in while you are...
For sure. What would you like? So think about your answer to that question.
Ask a stupid question.
Yeah, there are no stupid questions.
What classifies a planet, like as opposed to just a humongous rock or something?
Yeah, so that starts to get into the Pluto thing. So what would people like?
Oh, it's better if you do it.
Yeah, sure. I can dual wield. So what's your...
Whatever.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. So at the moment, we're not able to see them like we can Jupiter, right? Like, what you're not seeing a big solid rock. What we're seeing is a massive bright star, and the equivalent of an eclipse going around it. So they are able to see that the light that they're looking at gets slightly dimmer in a very short period of time, and that indicates that a planet's going around.
Right.
Whether or not you can tell what is on
Thank
it.
you, mate.
Thank you, mate.
Yeah, guys. Enjoy.
So
Chuckles.
where are the aliens? That's my question. Do they have their own hypotheses?
Are they so smart that they know they should hide because everyone kills each other?
Yeah.
I think they took a look at Earth and were like, just keep driving. Like,
Bail on it.
sophisticated.
Yeah. Who's in a brand that we're special and we're the only ones, and this is all, mumbo jumbo from a guy who thinks they're smart. So with that number, we are looking, right? So we think that if you are sophisticated, you should be able to see intelligent life in other places, because we like to look at ourselves and what impression we make on the universe. So we send out all this junk into space and these little things, and they might be able to be detected. We also pump out radio waves and light waves all over the place. So we're like a really noisy neighbour. We're not making ourselves quiet, particularly over the last century, right? So we've been dumping all of this stuff that could be read by a species out there, and they just haven't reached out. And we've also been listening. So since the 50s, we have had SETI, which is a search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and it's basically listening for anyone reaching out to us. And we've got all these embarrassing things of whenever we shoot rockets out into space with satellites, we put records, the records you used to listen to music on, with music from Earth and messages from, President Nixon or something. And, as if an alien's going to get it and understand. So we've been trying to reach out, but it sounds very lonely.
How many of the 10,000 or so that they think are out there are within range, or we would be able to pick something up? Do they know, based on how far our technology can hear or can go, and vice versa?
Yeah, so this one is all about the Milky Way, because the spaces between... So the Milky Way is our galaxy, and there are themselves tens of billions of those, but because there is just dead space in between. So the galaxies are lots and a collection of suns and stars. So this is just confined to that. So it's like an edge to edge. It's conceivable, right? But if you start multiplying it by how many galaxies, this number gets crazy. So there should be something out there, but we just don't know.
And how far does our technology reach within the galaxy?
Yeah, so if you've got your Milky Way is, that spirally type thing, we're not too bad. That was pretty good. There's your Milky Way, obviously. We're somewhere there, and what we tend to do is we can reach pretty far across it in terms of when we point things out. So we can go almost half the distance of the galaxy to try and see things. But everything's tiny.
So arguably 5,000 potentials if we're going half the galaxy.
Yeah, that's a good point. And what we're pointing out. The other thing as well is this period of time. It's like we're talking about, there's the old the analogy about how long have humans existed for. So if you took the whole length of the universe as a day, we would be the minute, humans would pop up the minute before midnight. So we've been here for such an insignificant amount of time, and we've been listening for the last half a second. And so this paradox of like, where are all the aliens is, someone put it really nicely, is the equivalent of, giving up looking for your mobile phone after 30 seconds. Like going, where's my phone? It doesn't exist, it's gone. So yeah, there's that level. And also, in that time, like, our technology has grown so much. Like when we were growing up, yeah, the idea of, where we would send things out, Pluto was a planet back when we grew up. So things have changed. So I think we're in the arrogant sort of like, yep, we've done all our looking, like it's a boy look type of thing, right? No aliens out there. But so a lot of really smart people think pretty hard about this question of like, if this number is really big, why haven't we seen them? And the answers are kind of, they're really grim. So maybe there is something special about us, because when you get to some of these points, something might go wrong. Or like, why is it that we get to this point and we can't find others that have? So if we know that all of these things kind of are there as potential experiments, right? They're out there, and they could be places where life comes to exist. Maybe there's something that cuts them off. There's this like barrier that that it's really, really improbable to get through. So maybe our equation is really wrong. So one that you could probably think about right now is this one of T for time, is how long do we sit here and broadcast out and, send some things to the moon and maybe Mars and all that sort of thing. And, when you elect Donald Trump, you start thinking that's probably pretty small. When the people that were, making this, it was the Cold War. So they were really scared about nuclear warfare. So they were like, no chance. Once you get to this point, we all blow ourselves up. And that's probably what's happened to all the intelligent life. The other thing is this part here of, the difference between these two. So we look at ourselves and our planet and how long it took for life to come about. And the surprising thing about that is once the conditions were right, so like, we have liquid water, even just the minute amounts, we have signs of life existing back then. So life seems to come about very much once there are the conditions for that. And the really cool thing about Mars and seeing whether there's water is that filling in this part of the equation and going, okay, so how rare is life as in the gooey stuff, and going, okay, some slime is life, whatever. But we actually feel like that is pretty probable. Once you have the right conditions, you get these microorganisms that could live there. But what is the tricky jump is to go from those things to a collection of really complex organisms like ourselves, and then from that to, technology, being able to use technology to build something that communicates with the world. So there's this gap there that we might be really super rare to actually get to that point. Because you think about how many species there have been in existence, and we're the only ones that we think are intelligent. But dolphins are very smart, so could have
Question?
Yes, sir.
What is our definition of life?
Yeah, so there are a few conditions of like, I think it's like being able to move, to consume, produce energy in that sort of way. I think it's like a pretty biological definition that goes from, single cell organisms up to, hey, we're big creatures. Yeah, so that's where you don't sound so kooky talking about alien life. It's like, well, that's everything from, germs through to, six-legged aliens, that kind of thing. So that's where, yeah, even just going to Mars or going even further out to some of the moons could be really interesting. So let's do that next time. So the other thing that it leaves us is, okay, the reason why it's a really big dilemma is because if there were even just one really smart civilization, what it would lead itself to is to expand really quickly, right? So the theories that they have that you could just stay on your home planet, but you would run out of resources. So what it would lead you to do is you would naturally need to go to other places, and your technology would have to expand. So if there were species that were super smart, so you go, oh yeah, there must be. But what that leads us to is that they would make a really big impression. So that they would be colonizing places and sending probes and all this weird stuff. So if we're not seeing that, then there is this question of maybe everything is so risky and that these numbers actually aren't high enough that we are the only intelligent species and that we, are the only ones that get to this point because we haven't heard from anyone else and we're sending out these signals as well. So how do people feel about those two options? There could have been life, but they never make it this far, or that we're so rare that this is once in a lifetime, and it's not even important worrying about all this stuff.
Could it also be that they've made it this far, but that they've done it years ago, or does that 10,000, is that as a reflection of right here and now in this moment?
Yeah, that's one of the other ones as well, is that there has been alien life. They haven't made themselves aware, even like the reference to like, just when we talk Earth, just don't go there, it's rubbish. There is that thing of like, maybe they're out there, but they haven't been trying to communicate. So that's one of them.
Or that they've burnt themselves out like before, right? Like that they were...
Yeah, exactly. And that they get to, so this T thing is that they've run out. Yeah. And that's hard because obviously they're not still sending signals or anything. So it'll be a case of like, if you discover that and you go, that would be really interesting. But that's definitely one of them as well, is that maybe it has been where it experiment in a certain point and it runs out. And that's pretty grim. So it's one of those questions that leads us to go, okay, is this something that we have that's very special, or is it something that's going to run out and we're inevitably doomed to fall up? Or something in between where it's like, okay, should we be looking out for more life? Does anyone have any kind of jabs at that?
Can we do a poll?
Yeah. So the poll would be, all right, number one is we're alone. Oh no, that doesn't start with alone. N is difficult, upside down. Is that right?
Same both ways.
Oh, is it?
Is it?
Oh,
I never knew that.
oh, okay. Wow. Physics was difficult, but spelling upside down. 2S is that they were.
That's really great thinking about that.
Yeah.
The comprehension. No, it's not at all the direction that we're heading.
And 3 is they are, and we just either haven't found them or haven't looked hard enough, or they're avoiding us. Because they have lots of different theories between them. So, what's your
Question before.
yes?
It's a pretty prime. Yeah. Do you think that number is moving in a significant way up or down with the destruction of stars, or the fact that, well, not it's a fact, but the universe is constantly expanding?
Yeah. So there's a lot of not in this original equation because it's like 70 years old.
Right.
So this thing itself is expanding. We're getting a few more pieces to it. So the galaxy is a really dangerous place, right? So all this shit is blowing up all the time. And, even in our history, you've had all these extinction periods because things have crashed into Earth. So it's a really dangerous place. And supernovas, which are stars collapsing and exploding, that kind of stuff, they wipe out half an arm of a galaxy. So that part is definitely a big part of it, and it's not something we can control. Like, the scary part about this conversation as well is like the many ways in which we could die. It's not like the Trump type of thing. It's just like it could happen in a flash because something catastrophic happens and it's not related to burning coal. That's a really great point. But the other one is we're filling in the gaps as well. So every time we find, so we're doing these surveys, and some numbers are getting even bigger. So in fact, if anything, these more recent surveys show us that this part is really high, so the probabilities actually are increasing. So maybe it's something in the middle here where we can't see the surfaces yet and be able to say, oh, okay, there's green trees or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, you had another question, but I cut you off.
Oh, it was more to do with... No, that's all right. It's a correction. I forgot that.
That's right.
Is it moving in the other direction at any rate? Like, the universe is a dangerous place and there's stuff blowing up, but is there stuff being created at a similar rate?
So that part of the equation is actually a rate of how often are stars being created. So all those explosions and stuff actually lead to the birth of new stars. So it's the circle of life type of thing. So but the other thing to think about is, if the galaxy is a dangerous place and you have this number of intelligent species, then they would never protect themselves is part of it, of like, okay, yes, it might be dangerous, but they have ways of, knowing where not to be or to, colonize different places, so you spread the world out.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Option 3, where they're like, fuck that, maybe it's because of us, maybe it's something terrible going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And like, it could be like, this place is, I haven't thought.
How old is our sun?
It's got a long time to go. I don't know its age, but we've got a while. And, if you think about history, it hasn't been that long. Like, our period right now is, in terms of astronomical time, is so tiny.
Yeah.
So, they're saying, like, we could broadcast for hundreds of thousands of years, maybe, and that would help. But that's huge. That's back to us, clubbing dinosaurs to death almost kind of stuff. So they're big numbers. Any other questions?
You're a really good long-term planner.
That's right. It does help you. So I don't know whether it helps you or not, but like, these are human existence kind of questions, and it's like it does pull you out of going like, what's my life about, to like, are we as people, like, as the human race going to exist, and that makes some people excited. So like, if it is that we're alone in the Milky Way, then that makes them excited of going, hey, in a few hundred generations we should be the ones colonizing. Like, if no one else is out there doing it, why don't we do it? So why can't we? And it's kind of like imperialistic. It's, there's all this stuff out there. Why don't we take it over? It's ours for the taking. It could be part of it. Did I actually answer your question?
Yeah.
Sorry, I rambled.
I'm not sure it was the right question.
No, it's from a great man. So it's Yes, so who thinks it's one? Who thinks we are probably alone? Who's uncomfortable with that?
I think it sounds very like human of us to think that we're the only ones.
Yeah, or it's like, egocentric.
Yeah.
It's a bit
I
fucking
don't
sad.
like it.
I think this is as good as it gets. Like, this is really
It's gotta
good.
be
I'm
Yeah.
having a good time.
There's got to be somewhere
But
better.
this is the peak of life.
The Crabshack,
Universe.
2000,
It's pretty good.
2018.
Bad.
But I need to see how someone else is living so I can benchmark myself.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is like, I mean, even if it was a case of, finding something else, then it would just expand so much. Like, we feel so alone. And just knowing that, like, hey, maybe not. But even if you settle on this, then what's the point? Like, what do you, I don't know.
It's a bit grim.
Why don't we just, yeah.
Does it make you hopeless or responsible though?
Yeah, that's part of it. So, hopefully tonight leads you to a great depression of life being pointless. But I think these kind of things have always given me like wonder, right? Of like, yeah, that if you grew up like us, that you were the center of the universe and there was nothing else out there, but the sheer number of things out there and the sheer size and the time spans in between just make you go, okay, it starts becoming improbable. And that's where it gives you that hope of like, yeah, maybe this happens all the time. And maybe we're not looking in the right place. What about they were here?
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah?
Yeah, that feels right.
Yeah, because I think the argument is about, that the spans are so big and the flashes might be so short, and that we've been listening for a minute, right, and going like, no, they're not out there, and also because of like the distances, they could have happened millions of years ago and that kind of stuff. So that one I think is good, but it's also grim because it tells us that that could be our outcome, right? But we're already living that because species go extinct. So that's probably our outcome too. So another sad one. What about this one? Everyone likes number 3.
Can I be on the fence here?
Yeah. There as well.
I know that may be a possibility, but I'm optimistic.
Universe.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I've got most of my body on that side.
Yeah, because the other thing is like, that's the problem of thinking as a point rather than a spectrum, right? Of like, if we do expand out and see, then hopefully you're getting some of this and, some that are just at this stage and you go, good on you, buddy, you'll be there in a few million years. And then, maybe we have some that are way advanced of us. Like, that's the thing of the loneliness is like, we just don't have anyone to help us. So we're just kind of working it out ourselves. But if you found something else that was intelligent, then would you be able to exchange or kill them? I don't know, whatever, what our tendencies are. So.
But then would they always get to a human evolution point?
Yeah, that's a good, again, that's almost an egotistical, like, is everything predetermined to get us to this point?
Yeah.
Because it's the most important.
Or something that could, like, communicate in a technological sort of way.
Yeah, I'm with you on that for sure. Like, I come from the biology side of things. So the reason why they say that number is pretty high is because evolution leads to more complexity. Mm-hmm. So like over enough times things will become complex enough so they communicate and they use tools and those kind of things. And I think what I think is really reassuring is the more we learn about ourselves and our own the species on Earth, and it's going, okay, intelligence is much broader than what we classify it as, right? Like, good luck to the people listening, because I just tapped the microphone. It'll hurt. But yeah, that understanding of what intelligence is the other part. Is like, okay, yeah, to to a really intelligent race, us looking at them would be like a cat looking at you, like your dog in your house, and you're just going like, I'm trying so hard to get through. It would be like that, and we'd just be making the most, symbolic attempts at communicating.
Sending out the record player.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, like what the hell? What the hell? Yeah. They must have records on spaceships that can go at millions of miles. So, yes. Has anyone heard of this stuff? So, did anything leave you in the dust? Like, anything that was like, please explain a little more? I think
That was 2,000, right?
yeah, so that's that is yes. So and that's of the sample that we've done. So I think it's more likely it's a percentage of this, and I think it's something like 10% is their estimate. So like 10% of the planet are around stars could be in the habitable zone. But the cool thing about that is our definition of the Goldilocks zone is, again, really egocentric. So there are moons on one of the big planets in our solar system that rains gasoline.
Jesus.
So,
Maybe we should go there.
I know, like, yeah, we'd start like,
Yeah.
that's the next Australian frontier. Yeah, so they're like, okay, well, and same thing with the stars is like, could the definition of life be much different to what we imagine? Could you live on a liquid gasoline planet? Whatever you imagine those things could be. So, yeah, I think those things are really exciting, but I only see the number getting bigger the more, like, potential you start opening of, like, hey, maybe these crazy things that we think, because, we find things living in radioactive nuclear reactors, like organisms that just live there fine, and to us that's like, no one can ever live there, so you never know. I feel like I've been going forever, but
I have a question.
yes.
Do you know anything about the philosophical implications of finding intelligence?
No, not. But I mean, there are things I would wonder. I think the main one is the linguistics is really interesting. Of like, how would we come to understand each other? I think that would be the really interesting one that we'd learn about ourselves. But yeah, philosophically, I think it comes down to like the core of what you believe the purpose of life is, or the meaning of it. So I think and that's why it's inherently interesting, because any of these outcomes you have some vested interest, and even your upbringing might lean you in one way or the other. So I think that's where the rest of the night can go, maybe.
What do you think about UFOs, Roswell, and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean,
You trash that.
they're not the cool aliens. I think, I don't know, I mean, I think it's an arrogance type of thing. Like, some people think that, they expect it to be a certain way, and they're the kind of, because, our imaginations are only formed by what we actually know, and it's like a weird combination. So the whole flying saucer thing probably comes to, so I think it's probably more likely to be something we don't comprehend rather than like, whoa, it's just like we imagined. Isn't that a coincidence? All right, I'll run it all again. Cool. Does anyone want a beer? Any drinks?
I'll grab a light, please.
Yes. Is that
Sure.
light?
This bottle.
Oh, sorry, my bad.
No, you're right, mate.
Yeah, I'll take it like you did.
Thanks, mate.
All right, nice.
I think of the movie, was it Contact? The one where...
Yeah. Thank you.
No, not Jodie Foster. The one where the big blob of shit...
I like you did.
Where the big blob of shit No, there's another one more versatile.
Yeah,
About,
that one.
and it's about linguistics.
Yeah.
It's kind of about linguistics.
Yeah.
Kind of
What
like
the fuck
About
is it called?
American linguistics.
it's a big
Arrival.
thing.
Yeah, Arrival.
Yeah. It was great. Yeah. And I thought it was a really, I think it works really well into this of like it imagined aliens in a really different way. And breaking our understanding totally of like, that their language is about time, that side of things. I thought it was really cool. And I think it got a lot of people like interested in again. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not like, you don't need a PhD to grasp it.
Time changes. So
No, that's Interstellar.
What else? So science fiction is obviously good at giving us ideas about what the future could be.
Yes.
What are some of the more interesting ideas that you've found through science fiction?
So in this regard, there's all this theorizing about, okay, once you get to this point of like being a really big civilization, what do you start doing in terms of like, what do you start building? And they've got this thing called the Dyson sphere, and it's basically that you build, so you have a sun, and then you build solar panels entirely around it. So you encapsulate a sun in a structure that absorbs all of its energy. And that's just like, hey, why, like, they would get to that point because stars are definitely the rich source of energy. So, you're not getting stuff out of the ground. You eventually want to be draining for their energy. So, these, I don't like that because you basically block out a sun and just go, yep, we're sucking all the energy out of it so we can fly ships around. I thought that was cool. The other stuff, I particularly the intelligence. I think communicating with the species on Earth, I think understanding that side of thing. I think there's a lot that's like, looking out at the stars is interesting, but we know so little about this place. And like, you're still diving down to the depths of the sea and finding things we've never seen before we kill them all. So that stuff, that's interesting, I think.
What about, is there a chance that we communicate with intent to put out a radio signal? Is there stuff that maybe we're doing, like noise we're creating that we don't realise we're creating?
Yeah.
That's broadcasting for us.
And I think, it depends on our understanding of physics. So it's like light, sound, all those waves that we're emitting, we have an impression on. Maybe there's stuff that we're not measuring. Like, but that starts to get very theoretical in the sense of like, we know quite a lot about the forces, electromagnetic spectrum, and if there's some other thing that we're impressioning but that we don't, ghosts maybe, right? Like, I don't know, the spirit realm. Like, that level of something that we just can't measure and can't impact. That's another interesting one. But the other thing that I think about is perhaps people, and that's one of the theories about those two, and the kind of leaving us alone, is that our understanding of our existence is inherently just about leaving junk. So like the searching for civilizations is about looking for their impact on things, right? So they would build structures that aren't planets, or they would, mess with a star, or like if they came down to our planet, they would have inevitably left shit here. But I think the other side is like, maybe that's not once you get to a point that you're not just like spewing out information all over the world or like just dumping everything. So maybe it's a case of like, you make an impression and then take everything with you or something like that. Does that make any sense? That our understanding of to be intelligent is to just use up things and dump it and go from this to that and burn things out, whereas it could be a case that they're very like conservative, take everything with them. Or like everything's cycle. I don't know, like energy sources. But yeah, that's where I don't actually have a physics degree, so this is all bullshit. I'm just making up on the spot. Well, anyone else got their own theories? The other one that's popular is that they are here, and we wouldn't really be able to tell.
This from a friend.
Yeah,
I
that
believe that.
what species do they think it is?
I'm not sure.
Or
I
it's
think
just
that they can just time travel was what they were saying.
yeah, and maybe you get to that point.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, what about the seminal Men in Black theory?
Mm.
That we're in a marble in a game.
Oh, don't tell me you haven't thought that. Like, what's the point of it all? Like, okay, so that's a galaxy, and then there's like billions of other galaxies, but then you have this other thing called string theory, where you have basically they're realities, and they have a number that has 218 zeros behind it. So like you have 218. Yeah. That there are just so many of these things theoretically that are out there that I've forgotten the first question. I just wanted to show off a number.
I thought string theory was that particles or whatever, like energy is connected in different places.
Yeah, but it's also quantum related, right? Yeah. So that every quantum state splits off the universe, and you have I can't remember whether it's brains or membranes or something, but that there are like many universes all at the same time. I can't remember what the original question was. Oh, the marble theory. So like, if you've got all this shit out there, what's the point of it all?
So yeah, why can't we comprehend that, right? Because look at these numbers. Like,
yeah.
Obviously, someone's out there, or this is
what do you have
in a game?
Yeah.
Like, why can't we comprehend that stuff?
And also
think
like
about that all the time.
Yeah, and I think it's partly you just go crazy as well. But also just the sheer waste of it all. If it is this case, like, things are so rare, then why is there all this other stuff? Like, why do you have millions of other galaxies as well? And that they would never be able to communicate. And, like, yeah. Breathe in and contemplate. And then go back to Twitter and,
But then
distract yourself from the sheer tiny reason for your existence.
Overwhelming, like to have to deal with that, a professional way, like to think about those kind of things is quite like. Yeah,
and I think the reason, like, there's not too much research in this side of things because it's not all that practical, but also it really changes your perspective on things, but it always comes back to that egocentric, like, you are who you are and you can go. Wouldn't it be great if human society existed for tens of thousands of years, but you aren't going to be there, and that kind of isn't going to matter. So it does. I think these are the kinds of questions that are the philosophical. They force you to do that, because if you learn about these kind of things and just go, all right, cool. But we do need to distract ourselves, because you need to decide what you're going to wear tomorrow, and that matters, I guess, as well.
Just on that, we talked about this. This is based on the Milky Way, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you don't know this, but what's your idea about, like, what then? Where's the edge, or what's the edge?
Yeah, I think so from our understanding is the universe itself doesn't have an edge, so it's expanding, and there's basically beyond that there is nothing, is what we currently know. But I think where I'm at currently is these other things of, like, there's the multiverse of, like, there are many of these things. So the universe itself was this event that happened, and it was a Big Bang, and it's been expanding ever since, and these galaxies pop up, and you just run on a different timeline, right? Of that is your equivalent of you think about an explosion, it's like, and that is a different time scale, and all these things are spiraling out and expanding, and you've got dozens of those. Like, it's all repeats down of like, okay, you have millions of these little galaxies, but then you have millions of these exploding universes, and yeah, that's kind of where it goes out to. And then after that, I don't know, many multiverses, and then it just gets crazy.
What about going in there? You talked about that almost like fractal idea.
Yeah.
What's the answer to this question? What's even smaller than the smallest things you can see?
Yeah, that's
What's the thinking around it?
Right, yeah, so so that's where it goes down to probably what makes up your subatomic, like what makes up energy is basically the question, and that's where your string theory comes in. And if you've ever heard about, there's 12 different dimensions and all this kind of weird stuff. And then on that, yeah, but I think the other one that this brings up, so I get away from physics, is that, because it's going to drown in everyone, but is almost the God question or the design question of like, you get to a point where there's no more information that we're getting, right? So like, we don't know what's beyond the universe, and then you really don't have much more to base it on, and that's where you start going, okay, it's a faith question of like, I don't have any evidence, and I never would be able to have it, of like what's beyond strings or what's beyond the universe. And that's when it starts to become a thing of like, okay, what do you believe, that kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, does it matter if you're thinking about that scale, we're so tiny. Yeah.
Strings interact.
Yeah, I think so string theory, that stuff.
Like the parallel.
Yes.
Like if you think about weight and. Apologies for like crushing this stupid question because I'm missing it. Like if they're all like, where do they line up? Do they interact with each other and move with each other? Or
I'm
on that theory.
So I'm probably out of my depth a bit, but it's related to quantum. So once you get down to the really, really tiny stuff that's happening, it's a case of, we know that subatomic particles, like an electron spinning around, actually is in two places at once. And from that point, the two universes kind of split apart. Because we have this thing where when we observe it, one of those states actually goes, okay, no, I've always been left, but the other one actually still exists. And that could be a totally different talk. Quantum's really, really weird.
Like the light pinhole.
Yeah, and it's the case that it's doing both things, but as soon as we observe it, it goes, oh no, I've just been a wave the whole time. These kind of things. So, yeah, maybe for another talk, but quantum itself is super, super weird. Not in the sort of like, what's the purpose of life, but just in like trying to bend your brain around it type thing.
The super cool ball bouncing in 4 dimensions shows you 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions, 4 dimensions.
Oh,
Really interesting.
oh, is the foot like a shadow, or?
So you kind of see how it bounces in and out of existence.
Oh, what? Can you do it with talk?
No.
That's the question. Am I able to sit down? Oh, thank you.